This episode, I'll be reviewing an encounter from the player's perspective rather than from the game master's. We'll get to see some different classes at a bit higher level play than the past couple of reviews, and we'll see a mix of creatures and hazards, and then end off with a review of the encounter design, some of the grab and grapple rules, and some other aspects that I think made this encounter a little harder on the cognitive load for the game master than would be desired. The example encounter comes from the level 5 portion of Book 2 of Paizo's Seasons of Ghost adventure path. This is your spoiler warning. I am a player in this campaign and have not referenced the sourcebook, so I won't know if the game master is intentionally changing anything. Our party is an animal order druid with a panda animal companion, a bones oracle, a monastic weaponry monk, and me, an aloof firmament magus. Generally, our two pure casters hang back and both contribute a mix of heal, debuff, buff, and direct damage, while the monk and magus both look to leap or climb around to generate advantageous positions. The panda, on the other hand, is the more predictable melee combatant. For this encounter, we had been traveling through the day and had reached a shrine where we had to conduct a simple ritual. After we concluded the ritual, there was a gout of water in the center with ghostly, watery arms attacking us alongside two swarms, as we rolled into initiative. I don't have the exact XP for this one, but it felt like we were treating it as if it was a severe encounter, while on retrospect, I think it looks more like a moderate or maybe even a low. In round 1, it felt like the hazard's initial trigger, which sparked initiative roll, launched the two swarms onto the deck and forced us all to make saving throws. Our monk and panda failed, and were knocked prone. In the classic quirk of random numbers, the top two modifiers failed while the bottom three passed. The hazard went first, and made a series of grasping hands attacks trying to pull us into the river. It picked a random target, via the GM's roll, to focus its 3 actions on for what felt like an attack, grab, pull style routine. We will discuss this more later since I think there was something very different going on here, but in the moment, this made a lot of sense, even if it did cause some confusion to the GM over how it was worded. Action 1 was the strike against Mao, and it hit with a 24 against the off-guarded AC of 21. The strike did no damage, and then it appeared to use the monster ability grab, legacy style, auto success, no roll, followed by forcing an athletics check from the monk to avoid being restrained. Mao failed, hero pointed, and then succeeded. I was up next, and had to clarify with the game master which squares are occupiable based on the various fixtures on the map. Then, with my first action, strode into the flank of the swarm threatening the prone monk, and then used Spell Strike, knowing that it is probably going to fare poorly against swarm resistances, but I can still often do enough damage to be worthwhile. One of the reasons why this is often less effective against swarms is since both the spell and the attack will both be reduced by the resistances in many cases, rather than combined for the purposes of damage reduction. A low attack roll later, 3 on the die, but it was still a hit against the off-guard swarm. We had to double check that the classic Swarm Mind trait doesn't give immunity to flanking, and it doesn't appear to, though I still am a little unsure on that one. Yuka's go-to cantrip is Gouging Claw, even if Ignition might have been more likely to get around resistances here, but that felt a little too metagamey to me, so I stayed with what her usual was. After seeing the resistance though, she probably would try other things in future rounds if no one had identified. There was a brief discussion of using my new reaction that would let me jump away and stand on the water after a spell strike, but I decided to stay put to give Mao flanking. The southern swarm was up next, but because of how we were spread out, the swarms couldn't really cover multiple people at once. It spent 2 actions slowly crawling over Nizuki, our oracle, and then used 1 action biting, which automatically applied a persistent bleed and triggered a fort save against some poison, which succeeded. We'll discuss a couple aspects of this creature design at the end of the episode as well. Nizuki was up next, strode out of the swarm, and he prioritized ending up non-adjacent to another PC, to eliminate the ability for the swarms to target 2 people at once. Nizuki then cast Soothing Blossoms to set up an area effect where all rolls to end persistent damage counted as assisted, and also where successes against disease and poison are crits. This was an awesome spell in this case. It's not one I've seen before, and it feels very on brand for this adventure path, so this was a very fun moment at the table. It's worth pointing out that the success to crit success won't make much difference on the initial save against these poisons, or diseases, but it might make a bigger difference when trying to recover from them, as skipping a whole stage on your recovery might be very useful. Nezuki ended his turn, took his persistent damage, and failed the recovery check even with the assisted lowered DC. Mao then stood up, did a one-action flurry of blows with the Kusarigama, and hit with both. No listed immunity to mental, but the Swarm Mind probably should have auto-succeeded against stunning blows. The save was rolled and it saved, so no harm, no foul. Mao then stepped back. Honestly, I'm noticing now that both Mao and I probably should have had to spend an action drawing our weapons. While we had been exploring all day with weapons out, we had just conducted a meditation ceremony, and given how easy this fight is feeling, even if we felt threatened at the moment, the action tax would have been completely fair. Pei, our druid, was up next, and hoped to kill the one swarm that was highly injured and hadn't acted yet, choosing to use an electric arc against both swarms, and we saw that both failed and took a solid amount of damage, which didn't seem to trigger any of its resistances. And this did finish off the injured swarm. The panda stood up with its independent action, and Pei finished off with a guidance on me. So as we started round 2, we still knew nothing about the Haunt, and had defeated one of the 2 swarms. The Haunt attempts a random strike, choosing Yuka as the target, and missing on the first. On the second strike, it hit, even with the map, and we now had some confusion as it looks like Foundry was implying it auto-restrains on a hit. The GM still didn't feel this was quite right, and continued with the earlier ruling of an athletics save, which I had to hero point to succeed on. On my turn, I strode to the remaining swarm and spellstruck again. I can't believe I did that. My spell strike wasn't recharged. Luckily, I missed, so no change in board state over that oversight. The swarm moved over me, adding persistent damage, and then moved over to Nezuki. Nezuki launched some silver needle darts, getting a crit, killing the second swarm. We have been ensuring our casters have ample amounts of different precious materials, one bulk items or weapons of silver, of cold iron. It wasn't relevant here, but I do think for people who like to use needle darts, it's an important way to add to your flexibility, so keep that in mind when you're looking for equipment for your low-level casters. Nezuki realizes he has one action left, attempts to recall knowledge on the Haunt, and learns that Religion or Intimidate can disable it. He takes his persistent bleed damage and still fails to end the bleed. We have no opponents left other than the Haunt, and Mao has no way to help with the Haunt, so we skip his turn. Pei attempts the Religion disable and gets a success, which was enough to disperse the Haunt. I'm used to most Haunts needing multiple successes, but this could have been a decision to move things along now that the creatures were all defeated, and maybe due to the confusion over how the Haunt was even supposed to work in the first place. So we left combat, ruling that the persistent bleed would end soon with the assistance from Soothing Blossoms, and we didn't need to play that out round by round, given that Nezuki's health and Yuka's health was still quite high. Now let's do some deeper dives into this encounter, creature, and hazard design. With my encounter designer hat on, I really appreciated how the different ceremony mats arranged the party to be spread out and out of ideal position. We were starting right in the mix of things, all interspersed with the enemies. The combination of swarms plus haunts already puts the players on edge, as it's 2 different threat types to deal with on a relatively small map, which helps ameliorate the swarm's slow land speed. I thought this was a very well-crafted encounter at this top thematic level, and it did a great job creating an immersive experience at the table. However, I think this was slightly diminished by some of the creature and hazard design, which caused some additional cognitive load on the GM. So first, on the Haunt, the chief problem was something like its routine saying, one action strike plus some number affects grapple. I feel this is rather unusual, and I can see why the GM was confused. Two of the more intuitive ways would have been something more like a one action strike plus whatever, 0 damage plus improved grab. Or simply a routine that says, in actions, the hazard attempts to grapple 3 random creatures in range with a plus whatever athletics modifier. For some of the key differences here, grapple is a normal named attack traded ability that works the same for players or GMs. It's an athletic roll against the fort DC. It contributes to and is affected by the multiple attack penalty, also known as MAP. Grab is a very common monster ability, which requires an additional action to be spent after a successful strike, and then does the same roll as grapple, but explicitly does not involve the MAP in any way. It does not increase it and is not affected by it. Improved Grab is the upgraded version. It uses a free action rather than an action following a strike. We were told the Haunt had a special ability if anyone was restrained, but no way other than crit fishing to get someone restrained. I believe this was a legacy monster, so with the old rules of auto success, there was no roll on Grab Improved Grab back then. There would be no chance of a crit if it was using the normal monster rules, and I think that is why they wanted to use grapple instead. Additionally, hazards that target randomly multiple times often get some form of ignoring map until the end, but some restriction on being able to focus fire. This is not universal, so I don't think this would have caused cognitive load and being slightly different, but I think in terms of telling the story better, it attacks 3 random people, each must be unique, all at full map, is probably more likely to generate the one crit success somewhere in the party that the designer I think was hoping for. So I think that might have helped be a more clear way of expressing the intent. However, another aspect into I think why it was written this way, Haunts usually don't have any skill scores other than stealth for initiative and hiding. So that might be why a style guide suggests the 0 damage strike approach. However, I think simply writing the grapple check and its modifier into the routine would have been the clearest of intent, and the simplest for a game master to understand what the designer was intending. A bit more high-level comments on the Haunt in general. I really appreciated how the initiative trigger and reaction was a non-damaging effect, knocking people prone, while the routine for the complex hazard was also more ominous rather than direct damage. You can see the grab happening, you can see the restrain happening, you can see it pulling underwater. So you can see it's going to be deadly down the road, but it's not immediately deadly. I feel we see direct damage trigger plus direct damage routine a bit too often, and that can be exceptionally swingy when the hazard goes immediately after the trigger, as it did here. So a big shout out for the flavor of the hazard design here, even if I am dissecting the mechanical implementation a bit. Now for the leech swarms, which I have seen as the game master in a PFS scenario. And I think these also contribute a little bit extra to the cognitive load on the game master and could have been handled better with a more stereotypical PF2 swarm design. Swarms usually have a one-action, swarming bites style of an attack, which affects all creatures in the swarm space, offers a basic save, usually reflex, to avoid the damage. And then there's usually a rider for another fort save against poison or disease, or some other non-damaging effect. This is slightly different than simply auto-applying persistent bleed to all creatures in the space. In the former case, the swarm can bite twice if it has an extra action after moving. In the latter case, persistent damage doesn't stack, so this leaves the GM with nothing narratively evocative for a third action for a mindless swarm. It doesn't make sense that it would move off to find a second person to bite. It could bite again, it would just force the fort save again, but other than that, it doesn't feel very satisfying. It's not telling a story. So I think this is a place where something more like the classic swarms that still can do some basic piercing damage, even if they can't reapply the persistent damage, could have made sense. Alternatively, I think giving it a feast ability, for instance, a one-action ability that can only be used on a bleeding creature, that might either give it a drained condition, maybe makes a harder save against the poison, something of that nature, just so there's a reason why the swarm stays where it is and can still move the combat along and not just feel like it has nothing to do. The other thing I could think of here that might work is a swarm attach, similar to Bloodseekers, which would let the swarm move with the victim until they are dislodged, and maybe it makes the victim clumsy or hampered or some other movement affecting aspect. We just need to give the Game Master something evocative to work with to help tell how the creature is meant to be run and what it is meant to do when it has spare actions. I hope this initial player view, followed by a more GM encounter designer view, was interesting to you all. I'm going to look to find a more challenging PL plus 2 or PL plus 3 fight for next week's review. And please let me know in the comments if there's any particular classes, rules, or types of encounters you'd like to see discussed.